Chapter 1. Early Days. I have no memory of running. My mother tells me I was walking and even running before my first birthday, faster than most children my age. But I have no way to remember what that felt like. As far back as my memory reaches, I have always limped. By my final year of elementary school, my right leg was 7 centimeters shorter than my left, having grown at a significantly slower pace. To keep the disparity from worsening, the doctors decided to stunted my growth entirely. My current height is the same as it was when I was 12 years old. I was born in 1959, the eldest of four. That same year, just 3 months before my birth, one of the deadliest typhoons in South Korea history, Sarah, tore through the nation. My mother often spoke of the terrifying floodwater she had to wade through with me in her womb as she evacuated. Typhoon Sarah remains the deadliest on record, claiming over 1,000 lives. The tragedy was compounded by the fact that our nation had yet to heal from the scars of the Korean War. Looking back, I see that storm as a harbinger, a sign that my own life would be far from easy. Even in the womb, I was a difficult child. My mother suffered through debilitating morning sickness for the entirety of her pregnancy. The only thing her body wouldn't reject was watermelon, despite warnings that she needed more varied nutrition for the baby's sake. She simply couldn't swallow anything else. Yet, I was born seemingly healthy, and I remained so until my first birthday. When I turned one, my parents followed government recommendations, took me to a public health center to be vaccinated against polio. That is how I contracted the disease, from the very vaccine meant to prevent it. I don't know what went wrong. Maybe it was because my body was weaker than average. Maybe the dose of the vaccine was miscalculated. I don't know, and probably I will never find out. What is certain, according to my parents, is that a high fever took hold of me immediately after the injection. For days and nights, I burned with it. When they rushed me to the hospital, the diagnosis was polio. The doctor told them there was nothing to be done and sent us home. The sad part was that they, in fact, didn't know or understand how serious the situation was because they had no idea what polio was. Later, they said they in fact thought it was some kind of indigestion. The Korean words for polio and indigestion are slightly similar to each other. They thought as long as they broke the fever, I would be fine. It was understandable considering what South Korea was like in the year 1960. It had been only 7 years since the Korean War was over. With no exaggeration, it was one of the poorest nations in the world at the time. Moreover, Korea was Japan's colony when my parents were of school age. Both my parents had their family issues, and as a result, both of them were deprived of their chances of learning. That's why they have never heard of the word polio before. The doctor likely assumed they understood, but they were left in the dark. They carried me home as instructed. When the fever finally broke, the horror set in. Their 1 year old daughter, who had been running just days before, could no longer stand. My mother said my father was actually angry at first, convinced I was still pretending to be sick from indigestion. But no matter how much they pushed me, I couldn't stand. They took me to the hospital again, and only then they finally understood what polio was. The truth they learned too late devastated them. Out of desperation, my mother took me to a renowned practitioner of traditional Korean medicine. After examining me, he told her there was a 1 year window to try and restore my ability to walk. If my legs didn't respond within that year, I would spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair, he advised. For the 12 months, my mother took me to see him literally every day. Once, in her frantic state of mind, she even fell and broke her own arm while carrying me across a pedestrian overpass. The doctor tried everything to reanimate my nerves and muscles: acupuncture and constant moxibustion. Moxibustion is a way of Korean Chinese traditional medicine to stimulate the body. You put a small cone or stick made of dried and ground mugwort leaves on your body's acupuncture points and burn it so that the heat would stimulate your body and improve the circulation of the energy or blood. I had to go through this almost every day, and I was only a year old. I screamed in agony as the heat seared me, and my mother could do nothing but hold me still. To this day, my body is marked with those burn scars. After 6 months, her desperate efforts bore partial fruit. My left leg recovered fully. My right leg, however, remained half dead. Only some of the nerves and muscles returned. I could stand and walk, albeit unstably. I could move only my big toe and my pinky toe on that foot. I could pull the leg back, but I couldn't kick forward. Most distressingly, my right knee was soft, folding backward as easily as it folded forward. I walked, but I limped heavily. Had my parents known of physiotherapy, perhaps I could have recovered further. I later met a friend in middle school who had overcome polio entirely through rehabilitation. But my parents thought the traditional treatment was the end of the road. I lived this way until I was 10, when a doctor fitted me with a walking brace to keep my knee from buckling backward. I wore it for 2 years, and it eventually corrected the joint's direction. I still limped, but the brace had helped. While my physical condition was technically improving, I was far from happy. The true agony of my life wasn't the disability itself, but the relentless mockery I endured because of it, and my family. As far as I could remember, kids around me always made fun of me, my disability. It was their play. Every day on my way to school and to home after school, kids followed me in groups and mocked me. Cripple, cripple, trying to kick a ball? That was their line. They even made a song out of it and sang it all the way to the school and to the home, every single day. The stench from my walking brace was just another reason to mock me. It cut me to the core. Yet I could not talk about any of this to my parents, especially my father. Not a single word, because the lives of those kids would be in danger in its literal sense if my father knew about any of this. My father was an extremely strong man, and his temper was even scarier than his physical strength. He was about 180 centimeters, or 6 feet, and weighed more than 100 kilograms, 220 pounds. He was so big as a man at the time that he had to have his clothes from among those donated from America because there was no size for him among Korean clothes. A man over 170 centimeter was extremely rare in Korea in the 1960s. Even now, 180 centimeters is well above average male height in South Korea. Though untrained, he could overpower a black belt in martial arts with ease. The reason why he was so strong was perhaps because he had to live through such a tough time of our nation, under Japan's harsh control and through the Korean War. He often boasted that he fought with dozens of gangs once and did not lose in his younger days. No thief dared approach our home. My mother later said that he in fact went to prison for about a couple of years for an involuntary manslaughter before I was born. There was a quarrel while drinking, which quickly became a fight. He lost his temper and punched the other person in his face. Just one punch, and that person fell dead on the spot. He first ran away, but eventually turned himself in after my mother persuaded him. That much he was strong and uncontrollable. You can now imagine what would happen if I told him about any of the mockeries I went through every day. There was one time it was known to my father somehow, and that same day my father grabbed the boy who led the group that mocked me and scared him to death. He grabbed the boy's both ankles in one hand and almost put him in a traditional toilet, head down first. For those who don't know what a traditional toilet in Korea in the old days is like, it's just nothing more than a big pit of excrement. It is covered with a floor with a hole you can relieve yourself, but the hole is usually big enough that a small kid could fall through. My father threatened the boy by lowering him through that hole, head first, while holding the boy's ankles in his hand. The boy was literally scared to death, of course, and his parents became outraged as a result. They threatened that they would file a court case against my father, and my mother was able to calm them down only after she apologized for what her husband did to their boy and gave them a large amount of money. After that, I learned to keep my mouth shut. I endured the mockery in silence for the sake of the family. The truth was that my family was in fact the real culprit who made my life unbearably bitter. The starting point was my father. As I said earlier, he didn't know how to control his temper, and he, in his own mind, certainly didn't have any reason to in his own family, especially to his wife, my mother. He picked up the quarrel with my mother whenever he was upset with something or someone else, and the quarrel always ended up with him beating her up all night. He picked fights with my mother every single night, 365 days a year. He slapped her, kicked her, and dragged her by her hair all night. My mother's feet were covered by her fallen tresses by morning. We, I and my siblings, had to hide anything that could become a weapon when his violence started, even down to a single chopstick. Korean chopsticks are made of iron. They can be a weapon, even a deadly one, in the hand of someone like my father. Otherwise, my mother would lose her life, literally. For your information, my mother was particularly small even among women. She was no taller than 150 centimeters, barely 5 feet. My father, a massive man, beat up such a small woman every night. We tried to stop him. The neighbors tried to stop him. No one ever succeeded. Then he slept through the day while my mother went out to work and we went to school, only for the hell to begin again at sundown. I remember reading a news story about a family who killed their abusive father by driving a peg through his skull while he slept. I still remember how much I envied that family, thinking they finally found peace. That much, my father made my life painful. Yet, ironically, the person who made my life truly miserable was my mother, the very person who suffered most at my father's hands. Every day she worked through all day and got beaten up through almost all night. That was her life. Not just physical violence, but the emotional violence was just as severe as the physical one. He blamed her whenever things did not work out in ways he wanted, as if she was the one who brought all the bad luck on him. He even blamed her for my disability as well. We listened to his vile swearing at her every night. The most unbearable thing among them all was that my father cheated on my mother again and again. Yet he never apologized for any of those relationships. In fact, he beat her harder whenever my mother tried to talk about any of it. Yet my mother had nowhere to turn to. Her father and little brother were in Japan, and her mother left the family a long time ago. She had no other choice but to bear all the misery in her life and carry on. In her bitterness and isolation, my mother turned to superstition. She went to fortune tellers and shamans, prayed in shrines and Buddhist temples. She spent a no small amount of money on charms and other superstitious methods told by fortune tellers. Yet nothing worked. Nothing changed my father or any of her circumstances. Then, apparently, one of the fortune tellers that she relied on told her that all her misery was because of her eldest daughter, which was me. The fortune teller told her that I was, in fact, her enemy 400 years ago, had reincarnated as her daughter with disability to ruin her life and drain her money, according to the fortune teller. What a ridiculous story. Yet my mother believed it, probably because she, too, needed something or someone to blame for her unbearable fate. Hence, she blamed me for all her misery from then on. I didn't know this until decades later, but still I could see my mother hated me even from my young age. She thoroughly took care of my physical needs, but that was it. She was never interested in my emotional or mental needs. What made the problem worse was that I, unlike my mother, was a person who regarded a person's mental and emotional needs more important than just being fed and clothed. As a result, I felt more often than not that she, in fact, wanted me to disappear to somewhere. She was angry whenever I asked for bus fare to go to school. She probably felt that was another money spent because of me. Then I, who was sick of her attitude, often walked to school, dragging my limping leg, without saying anything to her. Whenever there was a family gathering, my mother used to put both me and my little sister in front of all the people and say I brought all the bad luck while my sister brought all the good luck. Nothing worked and they lost all the money after I was born, and everything became good after my sister was born, she said in front of all those people. She called me a sinner in front of everyone. I hated her for it. When the house was empty, I would scream into the silence, I'm gonna kill you when I grow up. My neighbors later told me my curses used to terrify them. It was, therefore, natural that I've always wanted so badly to get away from my family and my home. I would definitely have if it wasn't for my leg. But every time I planned to leave, my leg reminded me of my reality. At home, as hellish as it was, I had food and a roof. I knew a disabled girl alone in the world had almost no chance of survival. Hence, I had no choice but to stay and endure everything, just hoping I could finally escape this hell by some miracle one day.